Hi everyone. In this month's Xero tip, I'm going to be taking you through the process for dealing with overpayments and prepayments within Xero. So in the demo company here, I'm going to go to a transaction and I'm going to use as an example. Okay, so this transaction here is what we're going to use. So we've received some money, but we don't have enough invoices to match against it. Now, regardless of whether you're dealing with an overpayment or a prepayment, the first thing that you want to do is if there are some invoices that this payment relates to, make sure that you go to find and match, find those invoices, tick them off before going to the next step. If you have some invoices and you have gone and you've matched those all off and you're now ready to record the overpayment transaction, the next step is to go to new transaction here and receive money. Now, if this is a case of you've prepaid someone or you've overpaid someone, this will say spend money, but the process from there would be the same. Now, if, for example, instead of there being an invoice to match, there's no invoices at all, and you just want to go straight to the overpayment or the prepayment screen, instead of going into match a new transaction like I've just done, you can go to add details, and it will take you to the exact same screen. Now, the first key step in this process is changing the option up here from direct payment to either prepayment or overpayment. Now, I'll show the prepayment one first. When you choose prepayment, it will still look very much like the other invoice format that you're used to seeing. And you can fill in the details just like you would do as normal. This will still create a credit note against this particular customer that you can allocate later. The difference is you can choose the account code it goes to and whether there's GST for it or not. However, if it's an overpayment, which this one is, you'll see the format changes again. And I can't change the code and I can't change the GST. And the reason for that is an overpayment is when you have paid someone by accident. So a prepayment is you're paying them in advance based on an agreed contract, whereas an overpayment is it's a completely accidental payment, and at some point it's either going to be refunded or it's going to be credited against future invoices. So that's the key distinction between the two of them. Now, once you've chosen what type you're going to use, the steps afterwards are quite similar, and the one really critical step you've got to get right is the contact. By default, the contact that is going to show in here is going to be the same as the payee from your bank account. Now, if that doesn't match a contact in your database, then what's going to happen is this credit note is going to create a brand new contact, put the credit against that, and if you were to look at your invoices for that same customer in future, then it's not going to match them up because the names have to be the same. So first critical step, get the contact right. If it's an overpayment, you can add in a reference, or a prepayment, you can do the same. Once again, you can update the description on either one. If it's a prepayment, you can choose the code, you can put in the GST rate. If it's an overpayment, you won't be able to do that, as mentioned before. If you're using tracking or divisional reporting in Xero, you can also add these in, regardless of whether it's an overpayment or a prepayment. Now, regardless of which type it is, you can also add documents as well. So if you have an email trail or some other form of documentation to go with it, and this is particularly the case if it's a prepayment, attach that information to this transaction. So if for whatever reason it sits there for months and months and someone comes back to it later and doesn't know what it's about, you can always refer to the documents. Once you're happy with how it all looks, click Save Transaction. It'll then come up like this with a green reconcile. If you have invoices that you've matched this payment to, they will also show in here. Now, if I click OK, that credit note's been created. Now, if you go to Business and Sales Overview, and then once it loads, what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll find that particular overpayment that's just been added in, and I'll show you what you can do to clean it up. Okay, so I'm just going to search for the credit note that I've created. So here it is. And you hopefully can just see there's a little icon here that says OP, meaning overpayment. If this was a prepayment, it would say PP, whereas if it was a credit note you've created from scratch, it would say credit note or CN. So in this credit, so it will treat it like a credit note, but like I say, you can't change the code, you can't change the tax rate because it is still an overpayment transaction. You can edit, say, the name. So if you have missed the contact and you need to change it to someone else, you can do that, and the same with the description as well. Now, one option that isn't coming up here is the allocate credit option. The allocate credit option is only going to show up A, if there's invoices for this contact, and B, if the contact name on both the invoice and this overpayment is the same. Now, I know I've mentioned it before, but it is the most common issue that I see around the overpayment space. You've got to make sure the contacts are identical. Now, if you're not matching it and it's actually going to be paid out instead, that's where you will use this make a cash refund option down here. So choose the date of when it's going to be paid, choose the account or bank account it's going to be paid to, and then click add refund. This will then add a refund transaction into your transaction list, and when that clears your bank account, you'll then be able to match it off just like you would if an invoice was being paid. The key thing though is that without this refund transaction, you will not be able to match the overpayment to a transaction that's come through via the bank feed. So make sure you do add this in before you try and match those transactions up. And this is the same if it's a prepayment or even if it was a credit note that you're paying out as well. If you use this, you have to use this area to match this transaction to a bank feed transaction that's pulled through into Xero. Okay, so just to recap, the difference between an overpayment and a prepayment. An overpayment is someone that you have paid or has paid you by accident. Prepayment is you're paying for services in advance as agreed. The process is pretty much the same. The key difference is that the overpayment only goes to accounts receivable and never has GST. And the key step with all of them, make sure the contact is the same. Hopefully that gave you some pointers on how to use overpayments and prepayments. If you have any topics that you'd like me to cover in future months, please feel free to drop me an email at josh@sidekickcloud.co.nz. Thanks very much.